Please join me in warmly welcoming Amy with her presentation, The Johari Window. Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Craig. Toastmasters is an organization that's been around for almost 100 years. Over 16,000 clubs in 145 countries, over 364,000 members. It's an organization that clearly knows how to succeed. But what is the secret to that success, and why does Toastmasters work so well for so many people? Tonight, I'm going to be sharing about the Johari window. It's a method of reviewing and ultimately improving your communication and evaluation styles. Communicating and evaluating, those are the two things we do most often in Toastmasters. And I think the Johari window gives new perspective into why sharing about yourself and soliciting feedback are not only important, but the reason why Toastmasters works so well for so many people. So tonight we're going to be talking about what the Johari window is, the 4 personality styles that you will see described in the Johari window. We're going to talk a little bit about what your personality style might be. And then we're going to review some strategies for how you can work with other people, regardless of where they are on their journey. The Johari window is a method that was developed by 2 guys named Joe and Harry, and I'm not even making that up. Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingham developed this methodology in 1955, and they did it after watching hundreds and thousands of hours of small group interaction. You think about small groups, that is where we do most of our interacting with other people. A meeting at work, a neighborhood picnic, a night out with friends, a Toastmasters meeting. Most of our interactions are in small groups, and the Johari window explains how people interact with small groups. And when you stop to think about some of those small groups of which you're a participant, you may realize that you don't always act the same in each one of those groups. And the Johari window explains the difference between those interactions. The first concept in the Johari window is describing all of the data about you. You think about every piece of information there is to know about you, and all of that information will fall into one of 4 quadrants. The quadrants are separated by information that's known and unknown by you, and known and unknown by other people that you're talking to. The first quadrant is called the open quadrant. That's information that's both known by you and known by other people because you've shared it with them. This is the information that you most often will see in icebreaker speeches when people are sharing about themselves. And in my introduction, you heard all kinds of things about me. I'm from Wisconsin. I have a DTM. I have some fancy degrees. You know that because I knew it about myself and shared it with you. All of that information is in my open quadrant, known by both of us. The next quadrant is called the blind spot. That's information that is unknown by you, but known by other people. And when you think about evaluations, that's the content that's in most speech evaluations because someone noticed it and is sharing it with the other person. Do you know what my blind spot was at one point? I was probably in Toastmasters for 7 years before someone once shared with me that I shrug way too much. I went back and watched some of my speeches. I couldn't believe that no one had ever pointed that out to me. I kept thinking, were they just thinking that was Amy being Amy? Why did someone tell me that? It was in my blind spot because I had no idea it was true. Other people may have known it was true, but until someone shared it, that's where it was sitting, unknown by me and known by other people. The next one's called the hidden quadrant. That is information that you know about yourself, but you have not shared with other people. Those could be your deep, dark secrets, but if you're not comfortable sharing about yourself, that could be something as innocuous as, what did you do last weekend? Some things that might be in my hidden quadrant, of all the things that you heard in my introduction, you didn't hear anything about, how old is Amy? When did she get those degrees? How long has she really been in Toastmasters? That's information that's still sitting in my hidden quadrant because I know it about myself. I haven't shared it with you. Everyone needs a little bit of mystery and intrigue. I think I will keep those in my hidden quadrant for now. Lastly, the unknown quadrant. Information that both you don't know about yourself and no one else knows about you. Think of someone who has an allergy to gluten. They've maybe gone their entire life knowing something was a little off, but they didn't know what. Neither did their doctors, neither did anyone else. It was completely stuck in their unknown quadrant. That's a physical example, but this quadrant is the playground of self-help books and therapists. If you've ever had an aha moment of self-discovery, it was information stuck in your unknown quadrant, popping out into one of the other quadrants. You never know what's in here until it moves somewhere else. And that is one of the most important things about information in these quadrants. Information can move. Think about what I said about shrugging. I didn't know that about me. Maybe other people didn't notice either, completely in my unknown quadrant. At some point, someone did notice it. Until they shared it with me, they knew and I didn't, in my blind spot. I just told you that I have that problem. I've now shared it with you, which means I know and you know that information has moved into my open quadrant. And I truly hope that by the end of this presentation, you're not counting the number of times I shrug, because I shrug a lot. But that is sometimes the challenge in sharing. It means that you are sharing because you're being vulnerable with other people. There's a payoff to that. It can be a little scary. Now, there are two things that are going to change how all that data looks and the size of your window based on how much data you have in each quadrant. Those two things are how much you share about yourself and how much you solicit and receive feedback. Again, the two things we do most often in Toastmasters. And as I mentioned before, your Johari window is going to look different from the next person's, and it may look different depending on the situation that you're in, because information is going to be in those different quadrants. The extent to which there's a lot of information in one quadrant can be affected by how much you share about yourself and how much you receive feedback. And if you have a lot of information in your open quadrant, for example, it's going to be very wide. The other ones are going to be much smaller, and your Johari window will look different because of that. The next thing I'm going to talk about are the 4 personalities that you'll see in this methodology. And those 4 personalities are determined by the amount of information people have in their 4 quadrants. All right. At this time, if you wouldn't mind taking that self-assessment that's in the chat, if you open up the chat, you should see a file that's in the chat. And it's a quick 4-question and very unscientific questionnaire that you can answer. You don't have to print it out. If you want to read through it, you can jot it down on a piece of paper and just put number 1 and your answer A through D, number 2, your answer A through D. At the bottom, when you're done with those 4 questions, there is a place where you can look up where the majority of your answers fall. And when you've determined which one of those 4 categories you've circled the most answers in, there's a link at the bottom of that Word document where you can share which one of those 4 you're in. It's completely anonymous. And all you have to do is go out to that website, click on which one of the 4 you seem to come back with as your personality style. And we'll just take a look at how people's personalities fall within this small group. And this is really, like I said, it's a 4-question questionnaire. It's very unscientific. You're not really missing much if you can't get to it, so I wouldn't worry too much. We're going to talk through each one of the personality styles, and you might start to recognize yourself when we talk through those anyway. As people answer, as people go through that questionnaire, and if you want to post your answers at the bottom, as you can see, no one can see who is answering. We have no idea which one of our participants is each one of these personalities. Feel free to go out to the link at the bottom of the assessment, and you can answer what your personality came back with, and we'll see where folks are falling. We have a few more results coming in. About 8 people have answered so far. And if you just notice, there should hopefully be one of those 4 where more of your answers fall. Ooh, we finally have an interrogator in the crowd. I was a little afraid we wouldn't have one of each 4. All right, right now we have about 10 participants, and you'll see there's a pretty even distribution of where folks are falling. That's not unexpected. And when you are in small groups, you can expect that you're going to see a lot of different personality styles when you're in those groups. That's why we're going to talk about what each one of these personality styles represents. And at the end, how you can work with other people who have different styles than you do. Now, again, I just want to say that questionnaire is super unscientific. If you get down to learning about each one of these styles and you think, I don't agree with what that questionnaire came back with, that's okay. It's just a way to get you started thinking about how these different personality styles manifest themselves in real world interaction. And that was the whole exercise that I wanted you to take part in. Okay. So I could go back to our presentation and we'll talk about each one of those styles. The first one is the ideal. These folks have a very large open quadrant. They have no problem sharing information about themselves, but you'll notice that there's a point where that information stops. They do keep things in their hidden quadrant because they don't want to overshare. And they are happy to solicit and receive feedback. They really want to know how they're perceived by other people. And that means that they get along great in small groups. When you think about people who are in this personality set, they're largely people that you might describe as very easy to talk to. If you walk into a room and think, oh, thank goodness that person is on this project, this is going to be great, that person is probably someone who has an ideal personality. And this is the personality style in small groups that you should be striving for. Share more information, solicit and receive more feedback, personality style when you're in your small group communications. And really the point of that questionnaire is just to get you thinking about how do these personalities sound like in the real world? How can you identify them based on what people are doing in small groups?
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so again, this is your ideal style, very big open quadrant because they are more than willing to share and more than willing to solicit and receive feedback. The next personality style is called the bull in a china shop. I like to call this person the I'm just saying, or I'm telling it like it is. They have no problem sharing information about themselves. They can't wait to tell you what they think. However, they are not as good at soliciting or hearing feedback when they get it. People in this quadrant can cause a lot of conflict in a group because they're so busy sharing their information and their opinion, but they're not hearing what other people think about them, and they have no idea how other people perceive them in a group. They're very comfortable with conflict, sometimes too comfortable. They can often take up too much of the conversation and make other people uncomfortable and afraid to share. So these folks have a huge blind spot, and they're working on trying to increase the amount of feedback that they are receptive to. The next personality you might see is called the interrogator. They have no problem asking questions. They ask a lot of questions. They don't always reciprocate when it comes to sharing, though. Folks who are interrogators can cause conflict in a group because they're asking so many questions and not answering as many back that sometimes people are wondering why. They can cause a lot of mistrust because people might be thinking, what are you going to do with that information? Why aren't you telling me anything? What's going on here? And interrogators can cause those trust issues in a group, even though they, again, may have no idea that they're causing them. Maybe they just want information and simply aren't comfortable sharing. But again, that because they are less good at sharing, they can cause that conflict within a small group. The last one's called the turtle. And the turtle has the largest part of their data in the unknown quadrant. They don't have to ask for very much feedback because they're not sharing very much in the first place. This is the person more often than not who's sitting in the corner, not saying anything, soaking it all in. And you would think that folks like this shouldn't cause a lot of problems in a small group. But the problem with turtles is that they tend to cause miscommunication problems. I used to be a lot more of a turtle before I joined Toastmasters. I used to work at a job once, and I walked in and I was in a bad mood. I had a bad commute. I was running late. I threw my stuff down, plopped myself in my chair. I went to lunch later in the day and came back. I overheard my boss talking about me to someone else on the phone. He said, "Oh, Amy, she's all upset about the project." What? I wasn't upset about the project, but he made assumptions because I wasn't sharing information. He simply saw what was going on in my face and assumed he knew what was going on. Guess what else I didn't do? I didn't walk over to his desk and correct the assumption. So I didn't solicit or receive feedback from him or bridge that communication gap. That job didn't go very well for me. Turtles can cause problems even when they're sitting there doing nothing. So remember that if you're not comfortable sharing or you're not comfortable soliciting or receiving feedback, you can still cause a problem in a group. So I've talked about some of the ways that all of these personality styles can cause conflict in groups. And as I was talking about them, whether or not you saw yourself, more than likely you saw someone else that you've worked with in the past and thought, oh, I recognize that personality style and I've struggled working with the personality style. What are some strategies for how I can work better with people like that? So let's talk about that next. Let me start with the turtle. Again, turtles don't say much and they don't share much. Sometimes the world has taught them that they shouldn't share. And your job in working with a turtle is to break all of those thought patterns with them. First thing you do is ask questions. Make sure that you are including them in the conversation. And do it with intent. Secondly, give them time to answer. Turtles aren't used to flexing that muscle of sharing. And sometimes you have to take a breath, pause, and let them get it out. No matter how uncomfortable that silence is, sometimes that's what they need, is just a little bit of time. I mentioned that sometimes they have assumptions, just like other people make assumptions about them. Sometimes turtles are making assumptions about others. Maybe they think that no one is interested in hearing what they have to say. Or maybe they think that other people's feedback won't be useful because it'll either be too harsh or too sugar-coated. Make sure that you're proving those assumptions wrong by giving them actionable feedback that they can use. Making sure that you're telling them things that prove that you are paying attention. And that is the fourth strategy, pay attention. Turtles think that they can sit in the corner and get away with that because no one will notice. Your job when working with a turtle is to notice and draw them out of their shell, their proverbial shell. One thing that to be careful with when you're talking to a turtle, though, is how you phrase that communication. For example, if you say to a turtle, "You've been quiet, you want to share?" That sounds like scolding. That sounds like saying that being quiet is a bad thing. And many of us are introverts. No one wants to hear that. If you said to a turtle, "I've been watching you. It looks like you have a lot of thoughts going on. I'd be curious to hear what they are." That sounds like you're paying attention and you really want them to get. And using those strategies with a turtle will definitely pay dividends. They'll start to feel more comfortable and they'll start to share more. Lastly, bring them to Toastmasters. If you think about the success stories that you've seen where people have profoundly changed their personality in time during Toastmasters, they probably started out as turtles because Toastmasters forces them through speaking and table topics to share more about themselves. They start to flex that sharing muscle. And because they're getting evaluations back, they start to flex that feedback muscle. Toastmasters can help turtles drastically change. And if you know a turtle, make sure that you bring them to Toastmasters. Turtles will often say, "Public speaking, that's not for me." And I always say back to them, Toastmasters is exactly for you if you. Some of the things that you can do when you're working with them is that if they are asking question after question after question, the best thing you can do is find a way to interrupt that pattern. Sometimes interrogators get going so fast, they don't realize that they haven't paused. One way that you can interrupt the pattern is to reply with a question. If someone asks you something, you can always reply with, "That's interesting. Why do you ask?" It flips the script and it puts the interrogator in a place where they can share information instead of constantly asking a question. You can also say something like, "That's funny you asked that. I was just wondering that about you. I'll let you go first." It's a way that you can turn it around and make sure that that interrogator is equally sharing. Now, if you do that with an interrogator, you'll learn very quickly whether or not they are hoarding information and controlling the flow, or asking questions for bad reasons. But more often than not, they may simply not realize that you want to hear what they have to say. And asking them questions back will help them flex that sharing muscle. Another strategy that you can use with interrogators, I've learned that sometimes people will ask me a question like, "What are you doing this weekend?" I'll answer the question, and I will sometimes assume that they know they can answer next. Interrogators don't always know that. And when you're talking to someone who is an interrogator, they may simply move on with the next question. The best thing you can do in that situation is end your answer with, "And what about you?" Again, it asks the question back to them and it gives them the green light to share. If you are an interrogator, find ways to practice flexing that sharing muscle. Make sure that you are sharing back with people when you're having a dialogue. And make sure that you are focusing on it being a dialogue, that you're not simply asking questions. There's a sharing back and forth of information. And if you are an interrogator, or you think you have an interrogator in your club, encourage them to answer a table topics question. Table topics is a great way to get people to share in a way that they can't always control or filter that information. In a speech, you know what you're going to say, you can practice it beforehand. It is exactly the information you want people to have. In table topics, you don't always see the question coming, and it flexes that muscle of, I will share without filters. If you have an interrogator, make sure that you're encouraging them to participate in table topics. Usually when I do this presentation, when I get to the bull in a china shop personality, this is the one where people think, "Oh, I know someone like that. How do I work with someone like that?" Let me say first and foremost that many people who fall into this personality, and if the questioner said it was you, take this with a grain of salt, but many people who are very combative or very cause conflict in a situation, they can sometimes be a little bit of a bully. Bullies don't stop unless someone stands up to them. So make sure that you are aware of that. This personality going unchecked may simply run over the rest of the small group. First thing you need to do is have the courage to stand up and stop the behavior. That doesn't mean escalate, but it does mean making sure that you are not being complicit in encouraging the behavior by not saying anything about it. When you find people who have this personality style, often people may think of them as maybe a little mean, but in reality, if you talk to the folks who have this personality, more often than not, they just are unaware. If you sit in front of the group, but pull them aside and say, "When you did that, how do you think that made people feel?" Chances are, if you asked a bull that question, they may look at you a little confused. They may never have stopped to question how they make other people feel. And if they did stop to think about it, chances are they would say, "They were fine. It wasn't a big deal. They know I'm just being me." Asking them the impact that they have on other people forces them to think about that impact, and then also allows you a chance to give them feedback. It gives you a chance to say, "Actually, it made me uncomfortable when you did that. And I don't think I'm alone in saying that." Those are conversations that you might need to have with somebody who causes a lot of conflict in a small group. The other thing that may happen with this personality style is they may feel like they can just take over the conversation. They have no problem sharing. And if other people do, if the interrogators or the turtles in the group do, that bull in a china shop may keep sharing. Your job to help that small group communication flow is to say, thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate that. I do want to hear from the other people in the group and ask those questions to get the conversation flowing with everyone else. I used to have a bull in a china shop in one of my clubs, and during a very heated moments of truth, we actually had to get out the talking stick, which was the gavel, and we would hand it around. And if you did not have the gavel in your hand, you were not allowed to speak. Sometimes you have to do extreme measures like that if you're dealing with someone who has extreme conflict behavior. And that's okay. They won't change unless they get more feedback. Make sure that you're giving them that feedback. And lastly, if you have someone in this personality style in your club, encourage them to be a speaker. It lets them share like they want to, but it also forces them to hear 2 to 3 minutes of pure feedback that they cannot interrupt. And it's a good way for them to flex that feedback muscle that they might be struggling to do. And then lastly, the ideal. What are some strategies when you work with an ideal person? First of all, if that's the personality you want to be more like, notice what it is that you like about people and emulate that behavior. If someone is very easy to talk to, stop and think, why? Do they ask you questions to get you talking? Do they share comfortably about themselves? Whatever that is, if you can model that, you can change your open quadrant and become more ideal. Don't find them. When an ideal person asks you for feedback, they really want to know what you thought. If you say, oh, you were fine, to an ideal person, that's not sharing. And it may feel a little standoffish to them. If an ideal person asks you for feedback, stop and contemplate and give them the feedback that they're requesting. They will appreciate that much more. And lastly, share back. Ideal people are very comfortable sharing. They assume other people are too. If you hold back from someone who's ideal, they may think that maybe you don't like them. If you want to be closer to someone who's ideal, share with them, and they'll probably appreciate that. The one thing you may have to work with someone in the ideal quadrant with is that if they have no problem sharing, they may take that a little too far and share too much information. The good news is, if you have to give an ideal person feedback, they're very receptive to hearing it. If you simply say, I don't think that was appropriate to share, they'll probably say, oh, you're right, sorry, I won't do it again. That's the beauty of working with people in that ideal personality style, and that's why everyone wants that person in their group. Bring me some questions and answers.
So the first question is, can it be challenging to have two bulls working together, i.e. conflict or talking over each other at a meeting?
Yes, it can. I think that was a softball question because I think most of you already know the answer if you've seen that in action. Absolutely, that can be challenging. And if it can be very hard for someone who isn't one of those bulls to try to manage that circus. Like I said, sometimes you can try something extreme, like saying, hey, here's the talking stick. If it's not in your hand, you cannot talk. And I've been in a club where we had to institute rules like that because we had people talking over each other like that. Sometimes if you can just, it may seem laughable to the people in the room, but if you stand your ground and say, we need to get through this conversation, and if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. Again, that bull personality will probably respect the fact that you're standing up to them and comply with those rules. Probably. It may not 100% happen, but you won't know unless you try. And that is my advice, is to definitely put yourself out there and try those examples with them.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the answer. The next question is, will you be going over some of the positive attributes of each of the characters, like the turtle, the bull, the ideal, and the unknown?
I certainly can. I can cover that in my next slide. Thank you for pointing that up.
Do you incorporate more discussion from turtles?
My best advice is, like I said, pay attention. If you can demonstrate to a turtle that you notice them, that you want their feedback, you're going to get a lot more from them, as opposed to simply, well, we haven't heard from Amy for a while. Amy, what are you thinking? If I was a turtle, that would put me very much on the spot, and I would resent that. If instead you said, Amy, I know you're good at this because I've been paying attention. Amy, I've been watching you thinking over there. I can see it on your face that you're thinking about something and I'm dying to know what it is. That demonstrates to me as a turtle that you cared because you were paying attention and you want that answer, as opposed to, you're such an introvert, or it's your turn. That feels like I'm being punished, and it makes me even more not want to share. So I think if you can prove to the turtle that you're on their side, I am a big fan of, there's a huge difference between you should and come on, let's do this together. So if you can reach out your hand to a turtle and say, I'm on your side, let's go do this together, you will get so much farther with a turtle than, it's your turn, why aren't you sharing? That will shut them down even more than they already were.
That is the end of the questions for the moment. Please proceed.
Excellent. All right, sounds good. So we covered a lot of stuff today. We talked about the 4 places that data can fall based on how much people know about you and how much you know about you. So you can have information that's known by both people, and that's in your open. Information that's known by other people and unknown by you, that's in your blind spot. Information that is known by you, but you haven't shared it with others, that's in your hidden. And information that isn't known by you and isn't known by others, unknown quadrant. Based on the size of those, where all the data is in those quadrants, that determines your personality. And when you are in a small group, you really want to strive for that ideal personality that has the biggest open quadrant. The way that you do that is to get comfortable sharing about yourself and get comfortable soliciting and receiving feedback. If you can do those 2 things, the 2 things we do most in Toastmasters, you can change the size of that open quadrant, and you can change the way people think about you in those small groups. The closer you are to ideal, the more happy people will be to work with you in a small group, the more excited they'll be to talk to you. And you'll start to notice that talking with other people gets easier when they're excited to talk to you. If you can work on those 2 things by doing more speeches, standing up to do more table topics, and getting evaluation feedback and really taking it to heart, if you can work on all of those things that you do in Toastmasters, you can change your personality style by changing what's in that open quadrant. There are 3 personalities that are going to cause conflict in groups. And yes, there are some skills that they bring to the table. Interrogators are really good at asking questions and getting information. But if they're doing it too much, it can cause a lot of mistrust. Bulls are really good at sharing what they're thinking. But if they do it too much, they can cause conflict. And turtles are really good at letting other people have the spotlight. But if they do it too much, they can cause miscommunication. That ideal personality can do all the good stuff without the bad, because they can share, they can ask questions, and they know exactly how they stand in that group. So if you can make sure that you're sharing, make sure that you're asking questions, you can get closer to that ideal personality style and improve all of your small group communications. I'm going to stop sharing at this time and just open it up to discussion. If there's questions, if there's examples that you want to share with the group, times when you've had to talk to some of these personalities, or situations that you've been in that you want to share, I will open it up to discussion at this point. Liz, I see you with your hand up. What's your comment or question?
I'm not confrontational. I'm like the person who knows someone smells but doesn't want to tell them. It's like everybody knows, but no one wants to be the one to have that awkward conversation because you're afraid they'll hate you, or I don't know. Is that a coward? I don't know. It's just
no. And I think, like I said, so if you think about that ideal quadrant, there was an upper limit to how much they share too, because there is a point at which you're thinking, I can't think of a good way to say this. I think I'll keep it to myself. And that's okay. there is an upper limit to how much you share. There's an upper limit to how much you share. There's an upper limit to how much you ask for feedback. There are things I don't really want to know that other people think about me. I would rather they just keep that to themselves, and I'll be blissfully ignorant about it, and I'm okay with that. So the point of this is simply, are you flexing those sharing muscles? Are you flexing those feedback muscles? And the more that you get comfortable doing those two things, the easier you are to talk to in a small group. Doesn't mean that you're going to say everything or ask everything, but just get better and you'll get more ideal. Yeah.
I took the quiz late. I got here late, but I saw 4 questions and I literally had 1 in each. What does that mean?
Oh.
Am I weird?
No, I was saying before that it's a terribly unscientific question. It's a terribly unscientific questionnaire. What I really wanted people to do is think about, when I talk about all these things in theory, what do those look like when you see them in person? When people don't want to receive, I mentioned I was in a club with a bull in a china shop. He one time did his speech, got up to give his evaluation, and pulled someone up and said, "No, you stand here and listen to the evaluation. I'm going to go to the bathroom." He literally did that. I can't make that up.
So who has to tell? Does the president get stuck with that? Is the VP of education? Because the bull has to be told he's a bully, otherwise he keeps doing it. So who's stuck with that?
I would argue that if you're standing in the room, you're at least on the list of people who are responsible. Now, if you're an officer, you can make the argument that maybe you're a little more responsible. If you're the president, you are responsible for a lot of things that happen in that room. But if you're standing in that room and you don't say something, in some ways it's the same thing as, are you going to let a bully get away with that?
Yeah.
Are you complicit in enabling that behavior because you didn't say something? And it's not easy. I won't lie. It is not easy to have those conversations. And sometimes you think, oh, is it worth it? Is it worth this escalation? But if you don't stop to have the conversation, it doesn't stop. And that person will think it's okay, and they might just keep doing it.
Amy, I have a question.
Yeah.
For those of us who would like to become more ideal, is there a recommended group size to practice these skills? Is there a group that's too small or too large?
That's an excellent question. I don't think that there is necessarily an ideal group size to practice, but you will more than likely notice that how much you share and how much you ask for feedback will change based on the size of the group. I know before I joined Toastmasters, when I joined Toastmasters, people said, "Oh, you're working on your public speaking skills." And I thought, I'm actually not. I'm okay standing in front of a group because I'm sharing and no one's talking to me, and it's one-way communication, and I'm perfectly fine with that. If I sit at a table, and I was telling someone the other day, if you start a presentation with an icebreaker, like, "Oh, let's just get to know each other and we'll all share," I am so wound up about that. I'm not listening to anything the presenter's saying for 30 minutes because I'm just running through, what did I say? Did that sound stupid? Oh my gosh. I'm so nervous in that small group, but I'm fine on the stage. It is going to be different for each person. And I think you'll notice that as you start to practice those skills. The best advice I can give is just keep practicing. Keep putting yourself out there. If you are ever thinking, "Oh, I better filter that," stop and ask yourself, do you have to? Do you really have to? Or can you find a way to share that information? Can you find a way to be a little bit more vulnerable and move that relationship faster because of that vulnerability? People respond to vulnerability. People are grateful. I used to work with someone who would just say the most ridiculous things. She would just spout it out, but people loved working with her because she was so easy to talk to. If she could say that about herself, oh gosh, I could probably say anything back to her and she would be okay with it. People like that make conversations very calming because you realize they have no filter. I probably can lower mine. And that's very comfortable to people. Mark.
Hey, Amy. I had a question regarding, I was thinking how this kind of kind of compares to sales. And in sales, especially when I was starting out, I was a big show up and throw up. I went talked all about myself and then my product and all that, and then didn't really know the audience as well. So you're wasting a lot of time. So are there any best practices? I know that in Toastmasters, especially in a 5 to 7 minute speech, or even in any table topics, you're doing a one-way communication mostly. Are there best practices for that compared to maybe having a executive meeting or just a meeting where you're all talking?
Are you asking in terms of what you share, or asking for feedback, or just the communication in general?
Yeah, I guess just trying to get more feedback, so you know if what your message is actually resonating with people.
Yeah, that's a good question. When I do this it's hard for me to do this on Zoom, especially when I'm screen sharing, because I can't see your lovely faces. All I see are my slides. I don't have a second monitor. If I did this in person, I would probably do a lot more checking in. And I did a little on Zoom. I have to ask Todd, is anyone talking to me? I can't see anyone. If I did this in person, I would probably stop a lot more often and say, did that make sense? Do you have any examples? And simply keep checking in. I'd say that a lot. Did that make sense? I ask people that all the time. The other thing I think you can do, and I've gotten a lot better at this over the years, I'll ask my supervisor for feedback a lot. So instead of, if I realize this is a tricky situation, I really don't want to do, either I don't think I'm going to navigate it well, or I really don't want to say what I'm thinking, sometimes I'll shoot my supervisor an email and say, what is your recommendation for what I can do in this situation? And what that does is two things. One, I'm being receptive to feedback, and she knows that. So she's grateful that she knows, she thinks of me as receptive to feedback. So when she does have feedback, she's going to feel a lot more comfortable sharing it because I've already asked for it. Two, it takes a lot of the pressure off of me, because I can say, I got nothing here. What's your suggestion? And she can guide me, so I know whatever I do next is not going to make her mad at me. She's not going to say, oh, I can't believe you did that, Amy, because I asked her first. And when I'm in those difficult situations, asking for feedback before you act takes a lot of the pressure off, because you already know what you're about to do is going to be perceived because you asked before you did it. And sometimes that just changes the whole dynamic of the situation, where if you ask before you do, A, you get a lot better feedback because it's not, what do I say here? And B, you can't get in trouble. They already told you what they wanted from you. So you know exactly how you can proceed. And that would be my best suggestion.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah, Liz.
So it sounds like the goal is to eventually have everybody become open in that personality type, but do you recommend, like, sometimes companies will look at a person who's leaving a job and figure out their personality type and then like try to find somebody like that? Like, do you think that clubs should try to find people like them, or is there a benefit to having differences, or should you screen to make sure you don't get a bull, or what if you need two members, or
Yep. I'm gonna answer in a non-Johari window way, and then I'm gonna take it back to the Johari window. My idea about Toastmasters clubs is that every club has its own club culture. Whether you know what your culture is or not, you have one. And one of the ways that you can get that out of people, do a little exercise and ask everyone in the room to simply write down 3 adjectives that they think describe the club, and collect them all and see if there's commonalities. Does everyone write down fun? Does everyone write down learning? What are those 3 adjectives or 3 words that people use to describe what they think of when they think of your club? That's probably your club culture. And if you visit other different Toastmasters clubs, you'll notice every club has its own club culture. And what I like to tell people is, you really need to know what your culture is, because all of your members do. And the reason why that's important is because there's so many Toastmasters clubs out there, people are going to gravitate to the one that matches their culture. If what your club is delivering doesn't match what they're looking for, they're probably going to leave because they feel that mismatch. If you are delivering what people are looking for, whatever that culture is, and it doesn't have to be the same. I'm in zany clubs. I've been to other clubs that are very business minded, and that's okay when you have a guest come through the door. make sure that they understand what your culture is like, and make sure that they're a good fit for that culture, because they'll probably leave if they're not. In terms of Johari window, I think that that culture fit is going to be really important. And it's also going to be important to make sure that part of that culture is how people communicate. If when you do that exercise and people talk, write down things like friendly, probably a bull in a china shop is not going to click in that club because there's going to be a lot of conflict. If people write things down like high performance, a bull in a china shop is probably going to click a little bit better in that club because they are straight shooters. They're going to tell you what you think, and people in that club might appreciate that. But keep in mind, those different personalities are going to mesh or not mesh in that club, and understanding what the personality of the club as a whole, that culture of the club, is really important to frame how you expect people to work within that club. Did that answer your question? Do you have another one?
Yeah, actually, somebody just private messaged me a question in the chat. Can I ask it to you?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, so the question is, does Toastmasters really change somebody's personality, or is it that people learn how to become more gracious and share more, share less, and just function better in a small group?
I would argue both. I know that my personality has changed a lot since I joined Toastmasters, and I think that the Johari window shows you a lot of why that is. I used to be much more of a turtle. Now that I have to share, and now that I'm comfortable getting feedback, I'm probably a little closer to that ideal personality. Toastmasters forces me to do those things. And that's, I guess, my point. When I started in Toastmasters, I said, oh, it's just a bunch of manuals. I'll read the manuals. I'll learn how to stand up straight. I'll learn how to not use filler words. I'll learn how to put all my thoughts in a coherent sentence. But if you look at the pathways guide, and there's always that little grayed out confidence, that's a lot of what's going on with the Johari window, where people are confident and comfortable sharing, and confident that they'll receive feedback that's actionable and that isn't harsh or isn't sugar-coated. And they get a little more comfortable in their skin. And also, when they're dealing with, once you are comfortable in your own skin, it gives you tools to deal with other people. Like I said, everybody is on this journey toward ideal, but they're not all in the same place. So when you work with somebody who is a little bit more of that bull, a little bit more of that turtle, a little more of that interrogator, you don't take it personally. They're on a journey, so are you. Find the skills to work with them where they're at, and that's going to help you keep moving on your journey too. And that's the thing with a lot of these personalities. People attribute bad things, that, oh, you're being controlling with the information and manipulative, or you're very mean. More often than not, people aren't comfortable in their own skin, and that's what's happening. They don't feel comfortable sharing, so they're better off asking questions, or they really don't want the feedback because in the past, maybe the feedback they've gotten is not the feedback they want, so they push that off to the side, and they just share their information. A lot of it comes from insecurity, not a place of mean. And I think once you realize that, again, people are on their own journey, you don't have to take it personally, but you do have to deal with it because it's in front of you.
Amy, we have a question from Sophie. She has her hand up. So please go ahead,
yeah.
Sophie.
Yes. So the presentation, the Johari window concept is about individuals. Would that also apply to the culture of a workplace? Say there is a workplace culture of turtle, there is a workplace culture of interrogator, and so on. Additional label. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think that goes back to what Liz was saying about the culture that you might see in a Toastmasters club. I think that in my experience, managers tend to hire people they like, and the people they like tend to be a lot like them. Oh, gosh, I sure do like you, but I don't know why. Well, it could be because you're exactly like me. And you over time, you'll see a culture of, like you said, a culture of turtles, a culture of bulls, a culture of interrogators, or a culture of ideals, because people tend to hire like-minded people. Sometimes that pattern can be difficult to break into. You know, if you're in a culture of turtles and suddenly you show up, and even if you show up in your ideal, you're going to stand out in that crowd a little bit. And sometimes you will feel, even though you are doing the thing that you're probably supposed to be doing, you might feel like you're working so hard to get information out of people, or people are looking at you like, stop sharing, stop talking. So it is good, and going back to Liz's question, it is good to have somebody in the group who maybe upsets that balance a little bit, because you can get a little bit too much groupthink where no one wants to change and no one wants to grow because everyone's the same and we like it that way. And that can cause problems, especially in a corporate setting, because no one is thinking outside the box, no one is growing, and no one's being challenged in that situation because there's too much groupthink. Sometimes one or two different people can upset that pattern in a good way. But if you're that one person who is upsetting the pattern, it doesn't always feel great. And it kind of depends on how comfortable you are in your skin and how much you can stand back from the situation and recognize it for what it is. And again, don't take it personally when it's your job, but it's 8 hours a day. It's hard not to come home and take that personally. But sometimes that's the best thing you can do, is simply remove yourself and say, oh, there's a theory that describes you and I don't want to get involved. And sometimes that's the best thing you can do. Did that answer your question? Okay. Other questions, other discussion? Yeah, Mark.
Being an expert in this Johari window, you could probably speak to this. Do you think Canadians are more the ideal, in the ideal box versus us Americans? And would Americans do better by visiting more Canadian clubs if they would have us to get to the ideal?
Absolutely. I have to say that because they invited me to come here to speak today, and I'm so grateful that they did. I think that no matter where you go in the world, you're going to find those 4 personalities. I think that whether or not you are a little bit more nice about it doesn't necessarily change whether or not you are actually sharing. You can be plenty nice and filter. I know plenty of people who do it, Americans who do it, as well as Canadians. So keep that in mind. How nice you are doesn't necessarily change how much you're sharing or how much feedback you're giving. Same thing with the bull. You don't always have to be combative to keep sharing your opinion over and over again and not letting anyone else talk. Sometimes your opinion's great and other people don't want to talk, but that isn't the same thing as allowing other people to share or listening to what other people are saying. And you can be plenty nice doing it. Doesn't mean that you're doing the best thing for the group as a whole. That said, though, I did have a wonderful time coming here today, and I'm so grateful for my Canadian friends to let me do that. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Just to let you know, Amy, there's no official evaluation form, but what I was thinking is, if you're willing, you could put your email in the chat line, and if anybody has some comments for you or wants to reach out to you after the meeting is over, that would be a way that you could collect some information for yourself as an evaluation.
Sure, absolutely, because I want to get comfortable receiving feedback and soliciting feedback. I'm going to absolutely do that. I will also send out the self-assessment if you didn't get a chance to look at that. And then also, if you didn't notice, Todd was nice enough to drop into the chat a quick 1 page of everything that we covered tonight that just has the 4 quadrants, the 4 personalities, and 4 ideas that you can use when you're working with those personalities. So hopefully, if you saw the presentation, it'll conjure up a little bit of what you heard tonight, and you can print it and hang it up next to your computer, especially when you have to deal with that person that you don't want to deal with. And hopefully that'll help a little bit more too. Oh, I see this. Is there a book about Johari for further learning? The original concept dates back to 1955, and they did publish a book. You can certainly go read it. I find that Google is your best friend. If you simply Google the Johari window, you'll see the original content that the 2, Joseph Luff and Harrington Ingham, put together. And you can also find other presentations that'll break down the information in maybe better ways than I have tonight, and certainly in ways that you can consume it and use it in all of your small group communications.
Amy, on behalf of District 61, I'd like to thank you for investing your time and knowledge in us so that we can grow as leaders